Hello and welcome to my EEE752 video. My name is Elise Westphalen, student number 214506745. For this assignment, I've chosen to focus on the 2012 film directed by Wayne Blair, The Sapphires. This film is a text that will be used with my Year 9 English class at Mooroopna Secondary College in order to engage them with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and culture in English. Firstly, it is important to consider classroom and school context when considering text selection in English. This is because, as Bramford states, learning is influenced in fundamental ways by the context in which it takes place. His view is supported by Tomlinson and Imbo. They argue that approaches to learning may be influenced by the culture in which an individual lives. In order to benefit students' learning, therefore, I have chosen a film that I believe will suit the demographic and background context of my learners. In particular, the demographic of the students in this class is quite diverse. Within the class of 24 students, there are 13 girls, and 11 boys. Although these learners are predominantly Anglo-Australians, there are also 4 Indigenous Australians, 1 Pacific Islander and 1 Indian student. Primarily, English is the first language for these students. However, many of the students are well below the expected literacy levels for their age, with the vast majority of students consistently achieving scores of primary age students for their on-demand testing. As the class consists of a number of highly disengaged students who easily distract both themselves and others, behaviour management has thus far been one of my primary focuses in this class. One issue that many of the students have is the sense that they are incapable of completing the work, and the mentality that they are dumb or stupid is something that I have been striving to change. These students are from a rural background, with the majority of them living in Mooroopna or in neighbouring rural towns such as Tatura and Murchison. The school's 4 values are belonging, achievement, respect, and teamwork, and these values make up the acronym BART, which is widely recognised and strived for in the school. The school has approximately 400 students, and 60% of them are in the lowest economic quarter, according to the My School's website. The township of Mooroopna has approximately 7,000 people. Tatura has a population of approximately 3,000, and Murchison has approximately 700 people. Mooroopna is approximately 5 kilometres from Shepparton, the regional hub, and is 180 km from Melbourne. In the township, the main industry is manufacturing, and about 15% of the town is employed in this area. As manufacturing and agriculture are predominant industries, I have found that education is not highly prioritised through the district as a whole. This impacts upon the Year 9 English class, as many students within that classroom have been influenced by this mentality and also do not prioritise their education. Consequently, due to these diverse factors, I have had to carefully select texts such as the Sapphires to ensure I am meeting the learning needs of my Year 9 students. Secondly, it is highly important to consider Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in both English curriculum and pedagogical practice. Superficially, it is possible to simply state that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives must be taught in classes simply because documents such as the Australian curriculum tell us to. At Year 9 level, and indeed across all year levels of the Australian curriculum, students are expected to develop an awareness and appreciation of the literature of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. However, is there a deeper reason for this cross-curriculum priority? And should we, as classroom teachers, simply follow the curriculum unquestioningly just because that is what we have been told to follow? In considering why Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander texts are vital in Australian education, I have contemplated my personal experience with education and consulted literature on the subject. In my educational experiences, I very infrequently was exposed to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander perspectives. In particular, in Year 5, I remember completing a unit on white settlement in Australia. Although my recollection of this unit is slightly rusty, I remember my family being shocked that we were not taught about Indigenous Australians when we were taught this unit, and instead it was taught as though Europeans were the first settlers. Similarly, I remember learning very little of Indigenous history or culture throughout my schooling, and it was really only until beginning teaching myself that I began to truly consider this perspective. This lack of education, in my personal experience, led to a lack of cultural sensitivity and naive tendency to stereotype Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. This lack of understanding is unfortunately not unique to my experiences, as it has been suggested that negative attitudes continue to have an impact on racism and intolerance. These attitudes roadblock the process of reconciliation, and therefore education is necessary in order to facilitate reconciliation. My experiences with Indigenous perspectives in schooling support the view of Craven and Price that Australian education systems have failed to address fundamental issues to do with recognising the validity of Aboriginal history and culture and their rightful place in Australian society. Consequently, by asking us to normalise the presence of Indigenous content, the Australian curriculum attempts to rectify this previous failure. Moreover, it is important to consider Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in English in order to ensure teaching instruction is culturally responsive. According to Orr, culturally responsive instruction recognises that the cultures of different ethnic groups provide content worthy of inclusion in the curriculum. For students of diverse cultural backgrounds, this teaching also allows students to succeed academically by building on background knowledge and experiences gained in the home and community. The Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians specifically states education outcomes for Indigenous children and young people are substantially behind those of others. Consequently, the incorporation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in both curriculum and classroom pedagogy is crucial to ensure culturally responsive instruction for these learners and to improve educational outcomes for Indigenous Australians. Therefore, the incorporation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives is crucial, not only to teaching practice in English, but also to all aspects of education. Thirdly, in considering a text for my Year 9 English learners, I have considered the Australian curriculum as well as the current classroom dynamic and capabilities of the class. As a first-year teacher new to the school, I have only known this cohort of students for approximately 11 weeks. Consequently, ensuring that my text selection meets the needs of my learners has been challenging as I'm still learning about the dynamic of the group. It would be possible to primarily base my teaching practice upon existing research about teaching students from low socioeconomic areas and teaching Indigenous students. However, as Nakata highlights, teachers must get to know their Indigenous learners as individuals and assess their learning needs accordingly. Therefore, in choosing a text to study with this cohort of students, I am basing my selection on curriculum and research. However, predominantly this choice has been made based on class dynamic observations. In particular, I have chosen to study a film with this group of learners in order to ensure I am meeting their ability to engage in learning. This particular group of students are, according to their on-demand results, largely achieving reading comprehension levels that are expected of upper primary school students. As another aspect of this dynamic is a sense of low self-esteem and a sense that they are incapable of achieving high results academically. Consequently, I have chosen a film as a text so that it is accessible to students with low reading comprehension abilities and self-esteem, as well as students who are either at or above expected standard. The ability for students to understand aspects of text, such as plot, setting, and characterization, through the use of film also has a positive impact on self-esteem, as students feel capable of achieving their best in English. Ensuring that they feel capable is highly important, as different texts and new concepts without ensuring accessibility for individual students may lead to giving up. Promoting engagement in learning through the use of film as a text also allows for opportunities for differentiation, as all of my Year 9 learners can access film as text, and therefore they feel more likely to stay engaged. It is important that the use of film as text engages students, as according to Hertwig and Brighton, behaviour management, one of the key issues when students are disengaged, is a key factor in preventing differentiation. In choosing my text, it is also important that I consider aspects of curriculum. Having consulted with the Australian curriculum and chosen film as a text, I believe that the Sapphires is an appropriate text choice for Year 9 English. For example, the Australian curriculum content descriptions state that students should be able to analyse how the construction and interpretation of text, including media text, can be influenced by cultural perspectives and other texts. This content description, along with others in the Year 9 curriculum, can be achieved by contrasting factual information about the Sapphires with the film portrayal of the group's history. Consequently, the decision to study the Sapphires for my Year 9 English class is based on my observations of the class dynamic, as well as curriculum connections and research. Although the Sapphires touches on some aspects of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, other aspects of this history are either stereotyped or downplayed. To briefly summarise the plot, the film depicts the lives of 4 Indigenous women in the 1950s and 60s who travelled to Vietnam during the war to perform for the soldiers. 3 of these women are sisters, and 1 is their cousin, and as the story unfolds, the viewer discovers that their cousin Kay was part of the stolen generation. She is reluctant to join Cynthia, Gail, and Julie in forming the Sapphires, as she enjoys her life in the city, but reluctantly agrees and travels to Vietnam. Initially, the girls experience small instances of racism, in particular when they want to perform in a singing competition, and, despite being the clear winners, they do not win the prize. For students who have never studied the stolen generation nor experienced racism, this film provides a strong basic entry point for studying these aspects of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history. Although the film provides a basic understanding of this history, however, it is largely underplayed throughout the film, and issues of racism are quickly and historically inaccurately resolved. This inaccuracy is strongly criticised by Stratton. He argues that the film minimises the mistreatment of Aboriginals in Australia in the 50s and 60s and downplays the racism of the assimilation period, implying that the stolen generation had positive results. He suggests that this is achieved through the placement of Kath living in the city and hosting Tupperware parties, initially embarrassed to find her 3 Indigenous cousins on her doorstep, as she has shunned this aspect of her history. This suggests a considerably conservative view of the stolen generation that continues throughout the film and misrepresents the mistreatment that Indigenous Australians experienced and continue to experience. In order to teach this text, it is therefore necessary to clearly convey to students that this was not the reality for most Indigenous Australians in the 1950s and 1960s. Consequently, while the Sapphires presents a basic view of the life of Indigenous Australians in the 50s and 60s, there are limitations in using this text to teach students about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and perspective. In developing a teaching strategy for utilising this text to develop intercultural understanding, it is important to consider a variety of aspects of Indigenous culture in the classroom. In the Teaching of Film and Mooroopna Secondary College, we typically have 2 viewings of the film, an initial screening and then a second screening, where learners can engage in higher order thinking. In order to teach students about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives through the use of the Sapphires, it is important that students initially conduct their own research into Indigenous history in Australia. As a diagnostic assessment to assess prior understanding, therefore, I would conduct a short group activity where students can discuss their existing understanding of Indigenous history. This diagnostic would be conducted as a group assessment so that students who know little about this aspect of our history do not feel alienated and embarrassed by their lack of understanding. Following this, students would conduct initial research on the original Sapphires, 4 women who grew up in Shepparton, a town less than 10 kilometres from Mooroopna. Consequently, throughout the film, students would consider the contrast between the historically accurate descriptions of the lives of Indigenous Australians in the 50s and 60s and the entertaining fictionalised version presented in the Sapphires. In considering this, students would therefore learn about the Australian public and the media's tendency to downplay aspects of our history that we are not proud of, and would learn to critically think about the way the media positions them to feel. Similarly, learners would also consider Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. Moreover, in teaching this unit, it is important to engage students to learn through culture, not just about culture. This, according to Younger, Porter and Kirby, means that it is important to teach students about Indigenous culture by applying Indigenous styles of learning in the classroom rather than teaching the culture in a mainstream fashion. They emphasise the role of dialogical forms of learning and the impact that story sharing can have. As story sharing as a starting point for memory, employing a teaching strategy of engaging students in dialogue about who they are and their experiences and then linking this to content in the lesson is beneficial in immersing learners in Indigenous culture. The text selection of utilising a film as part of teaching strategy is also beneficial, as Western dialogical forms are a good match with Aboriginal yarning modalities. Consequently, in teaching learners about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, the use of film as text would contribute to incorporating Indigenous culture into a classroom teaching strategy. The development of a teaching strategy for teaching the Sapphires to Mooroopna Secondary College Year 9 English students would involve both teaching about history and culture and teaching through Indigenous culture. In order to teach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in my Year 9 English class, the film The Sapphires would be highly beneficial. Although aspects of the film are historically inaccurate and are a conservative portrayal of the treatment of Indigenous Australians in the 50s and 60s, the accessibility of the film as a text for my students offers the opportunity to conduct further research about why entertaining media forms exist rather than media that depicts reality. In developing a teaching strategy surrounding this text, it is ultimately important to consider teaching through Indigenous culture rather than simplistically about it.